Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever, however you're listening. Hopefully, you're doing well. I apologize, everybody. I know I said on 5 till midnight, which, if you are not subscribed to 5 till midnight, please go over to our YouTube channel and please do that right now. I said on 5 till midnight that I would have Mike Jackman on. He's not feeling too hot, so we rescheduled. He will be on again to talk JFK and some horror movies, which I'm really looking forward to that rather than the political stuff, which obviously I enjoy talking about that too. But I'm sure it'll be a cool show. So he's rescheduled to come back on. So do not try to go more than a week without doing a show. So here we are. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we talked about on Monday night on 5 till midnight and what everybody's been talking about, including myself, and that is the debate between Douglas Murray and Dave Smith. And if Dave's somehow listening, check your DMs because I'd love for you to come back on the show. And if anybody has a better line to Dave than I do, he's been on the show before, but he's very, very tough to get a hold of. So once again, open invitation for him to come on and discuss these things a little bit more. But regardless, I want to talk about that because I think there's a little bit more to this debate than just two people having a conversation about foreign policy, if you will. So, of course, we're going to dive into that a little bit. I got a couple clips pulled up. We'll see how long I go, how I'm feeling, and everything. My throat's feeling a little dry, but I'm feeling overall pretty good. Hopefully, you are too. So, before we get into the rest of today's show, please make sure you go to all the links below to figure out where you can find me, support me, and all that good stuff. I do have a baby registry for my daughter that's going to be, born here in a couple months. If you do want to purchase anything for me off of Amazon or Walmart registry, just get a hold of me. Facebook. I know Twitter could be a little shoddy with DMs, but TikTok, I think, but Facebook's probably the best way to get a hold of me, or email kamatovic343 at gmail.com if you would like to help me with that. And obviously nobody has to, but we're talking about patronizing me. Obviously, feel free to become a channel member. This weekend, we're going to be playing a little bit of a longer show than we normally are. So we're going to be throwing some covers out there. I'll probably put one of those up. So if you're in the southwestern Pennsylvania area, specifically Butler, it's going to be a pretty short drive for you to come on out and check us out at the 11th Frame. We're going to be playing with our buddies in Skell. So it's going to be a really, really cool show. So one more time, if you're in that area, feel free to come check it out. And of course, Tiger Fitness through the link below. Feel free to go over there. I saw somebody place an order almost like identical to mine. They got HCL, 3 things of creatine, a couple shirts, beta alanine, and they got the same amino acids as I did, which are the Pump Chaser strawberry lemonade. And listen, I cannot recommend those enough. I know branched chain amino acids are just basically tasty water, but it will make your water taste damn good. So, one more time, Tucker Fitness through the link below. Use code Kyle. Check out to let them know that I sent you. Gives me a little bit of kickback and helps support the brand that supports you and obviously supports me as well. So I think that's about all the shilling I got. Obviously, Fox and Tons Coffee, Kyle, check out, and Deem Fit through the link below for all that good stuff. And without further ado, guys, let's rock and roll. And welcome back, everybody. Hopefully, you were doing well one more time. The weather's starting to brighten up here in Pennsylvania, and I am so desperate to be a Florida man. I know I say this all the time, but can you guys jack my subscriber count up to 100 and get all my watch hours up and make every single video go viral so that way I could just afford to live down in Florida permanently? I would produce so much more content too because I would have more money and more time in my hands. But you didn't come to hear me beg for money or anything like that. The debate between Douglas Murray and Dave Smith. Very, very interesting. I listened to it twice. I obviously had no idea that this was coming up, but when it came out, I'm like, oh well, that's fascinating because I think I'm pretty sure I tweeted out at one point that this debate should happen. Obviously, I'm not taking credit for being the one that put it together. I'm not, but plenty of other people were kind of all about this too. Specifically after Cenk Uygur had kind of embarrassed himself debating Douglas Murray, even though he really didn't have anything. And even in this debate today, he didn't really, not today, but whenever it aired and whenever they did it, he really didn't have much. And that's, I think, probably what surprises a lot of people. It's just that, like, some people that are supposed to be like these amazing debaters and these people who know so much, sometimes you find out that they know very, very little and they're not very, very well versed in the arguments. And is my friend Connor Freeman, which if he's listening, man, we got to get together sometime again. But um, uh, he's very, very well versed in the Hezbollah, which is the Israeli term for propaganda. Um, it was kind of the usual pontificating about how the war in Gaza is all Hamas's fault, which just to me is just such a ridiculous standard that we wouldn't apply to anybody else, or that just isn't universally applied. I heard Lane Norton say this, and I kind of like saying it, and it makes sense a lot. But he says, basically, like symmetrical application of logic. And I know this sounds pretty basic, but like what I look for whenever I'm talking to people about stuff is a symmetrical application of logic. So where Hamas is obviously guilty of the people they killed on October 7th, where you see some people saying like they didn't kill any people when it's pretty clear they did. Um, they would never they then, go on to say that Israel isn't responsible for dropping bombs on hospitals, churches, synagogues, and whatever else, apartment buildings, that they're not responsible for, or that, yeah, Israel isn't responsible for that because Hamas started the war. Well, or, the other thing is that they drop leaflets on top of hospitals or apartment buildings, which no other military does, allegedly. And that makes it okay to just completely level a building. I think if you think that, I think you're a psychopath. I think you're wrong because, if I were to tell somebody that if you are found sleeping in your bed at this specific time, then that makes it okay for me to go in there and theoretically end your life. People look at me and think I'm a psychopath and that I'm completely wrong, and they would be absolutely right to do so. Um, for some reason, we only apply that to this situation, or the same deal whenever people say, oh well, what moral culpability do the Palestinians have for electing Hamas? Well, are you sure you want to apply that logic symmetrically? Because if we're going to apply that logic to the U.S. Citizenry, then that means we're responsible for millions of dead people. I'll see if I can find the clip, but Scott Horton, when he was debating Bill Kristol, had said that we're basically responsible for a Holocaust worth of death all throughout the world, throughout the Middle Eastern wars. Let me see if I could find this real quick. Okay, here we go. And this was tweeted out by Dave Benner, which I think that's probably gonna be somebody I'll get on the show sometime soon. Him and I just recently started following each other, and I always like some of the stuff that he puts out. So here's this clip from Horton eating Bill Kristol's lunch.
2 million dead in Korea, 3 million in Vietnam, 1.5 million or 2 killed in America's Middle East wars, 500,000 dead in the civil war caused by the American coup in Guatemala, massacres and pseudo-genocides, even in some cases, perpetrated by American puppets, governments protected by the United States of America. He always says America has kept the peace for 75 years. The USA has killed a Holocaust worth of civilians.
I'm going to have a comment on a discourse that, trivializes the Holocaust by saying the United States has conducted Holocaust, that attacks, that demeans the United States in really a grotesque way.
On trivializing the Holocaust, our government, led by the neoconservative hawks, call every opponent of the American government Hitler. Noriega's Hitler, Saddam Hussein is Hitler. For Trump to have negotiated with the Taliban, that's just like Neville Chamberlain negotiating with Hitler. Oh, Muammar Gaddafi, the guy from the Naked Gun too? Yeah, no, we got to get him too. He's Hitler too. They're all Hitler. Speaking of trivializing the Holocaust.
Comment, Bill? No.
That is a pretty good clip. Yeah, Moldy, exactly. Yeah, Israel's never done anything wrong ever. Yeah, that's essentially what you're supposed to believe. And, not to ever say that the Palestinians haven't done anything wrong. And I'm not well versed enough on the history to give you an exact breakdown of when what went wrong. But I mean, it's pretty clear that if you're bombing maternity wards, hospitals, which, you know, I guess there is well documented proof. I've never really looked too thoroughly into it that Hamas has stored some of these weapons and stuff in churches and hospitals. But I mean, if I'm being honest, I have to believe that that claim is incredibly hyperbolic, or at least they use that to death. Like that never, it doesn't happen with the frequency that we're told. There was a video going around, I want to say it was a couple months right after October 7th, where they literally planted guns on people and said, "Oh, look." And then, you know, of course, they had Mein Kampf books or something like that in some of these bedrooms. And it's like, really? Do you really think there's children in Gaza reading Mein Kampf? Like, no, that's just not happening. Um, but the other thing that I kind of wanted to touch on while we're talking about a lot of this stuff was just like the first 40 minutes of this debate between Murray and Dave was he was so upset about something that Daryl Cooper said, something that somebody that he had never really listened to and said he doesn't have to listen to. He was so upset about things that they said that he felt the need to air this grievance with two other people who were not that person. Like, and I don't think any of us are above bitching about what other people say in a certain respect. Like, you know, I'll do this with Donald Trump, and this is, you know, knocking my own credibility, I suppose, where I said that Donald Trump's on every side of every issue. Where, like, you know, the latest news right now is that Trump actually declined Israel's plan to jointly attack Iran with the United States. Now, the counter argument for this, at least from the more anti-Trump side, which I guess you could say I'm more on than not, is that Trump had said all throughout the campaign, and then even in his first term, you know, he took military actions against Iran, sanctioned Iran, you know, ripped up the Iran nuclear deal, drone struck Soleimani, obviously, as nobody would forget. And then throughout the campaign, he was saying that he would bomb, you know, blow up major cities in Iran. And said that they would bomb the nuclear facilities inside Iran as well. So that right there would say that, okay, well, Trump's probably not in favor of peace with Iran when he's having this kind of rhetoric and actually has a policy record of doing things that would inflame tensions with Iran. But, you know, to the side that's a little bit more pro-Trump, they would be right in saying that, okay, well, he's not controlled by Israel, which I think is, you know, fair enough. I think you have kind of two ways to look at it in that respect, where it's like, okay, well, he got a lot of money from Miriam Adelson and then has a documented policy history of showing loyalty to Israel. But right now, this is a time where he said, I'm not going to give them everything they want. There's kind of like this, I don't want to say like a fine line that you have to walk, but you can observe the reality and see, okay, well, and this is what I try to point out to people, and it's so frustrating, is that Trump has displayed loyalty to Israel, right? Throughout his first term of, you know, basically giving them a lot of what they wanted, you know, the Golan Heights in Syria, um, drone striking Syria, and then also, you know, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, anti-BDS laws, and then this term as well, filling his cabinet with a whole bunch of people who are totally just all in for Israel. But then you hear about something like this, and same deal with, like, he didn't want to give, it's not necessarily to be giving Israel regime change, but, like, you know, the neoconservative goal for a long time was regime change in Syria, and Trump did not want to do that. In fact, he cut off the CIA program of arming the rebels there in Syria. So, you know, there's, you kind of have to call balls and strikes. Trump does have agency, but he also is loyal to his donors in a certain respect, but he's also not afraid to defy them. Where, you know, now you see a little bit of butting up with, excuse me, kind of the PayPal mafia with this whole stock market deal where, I think like 2 podcasts ago, I talked about this, where it's just kind of like, it's a fucking stock market, dude. But, you know, it is undoubtedly fucking with a lot of rich people's wealth when you start to tank the stock market, because that's where a lot of their assets are tied up in. Because we know that, like, a lot of the inflation over the last like 30 years had went mostly into like assets and stocks and bonds and stuff like that. So basically those prices went way up, but like the prices for consumer goods haven't necessarily gone up as much. The inflation just worked its way a lot into that sector. So, kind of getting back to the point that I was on there before I got off on a long tangent about, you know, Trump's loyalty and, you know, either the lack thereof or the actual loyalty. He literally spent almost like the first hour complaining about things that Daryl Cooper said about, you know, his perspective on World War II, which you could call revisionist history or not. But the claim that what Daryl Cooper had said was basically that, he considered Churchill the great or the chief villain of World War II. And he even said himself that he didn't think that he committed the most atrocities or anything like that. But it's a fair point to raise that when Churchill explicitly did a lot of things that, brought World War II about, and I'm not a World War II expert at all, but, imposing the Treaty of Versailles on Germany and not really settling, giving Germany their full autonomy, basically guaranteed that something like a World War II would happen. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm missing here, but obviously there is a lot of blame that seems to escape Churchill when he was the one that could have prevented World War II from ever happening. I do look at somebody who knows that they're on that path to cause something like that to happen. Um, if they know they can prevent it but choose not to, then I think we should look at that person with a little bit of skepticism and, criticize that person for not doing all they could to stop what most people would consider to be the worst thing that ever happened in the history of the world. Let me run a quick ad real quick and we will continue on the show. All right, we're going to take a second today to chill and tell you about the show's sponsors, Tiger Fitness. Make sure you go to the link below to get all the supplements that I use day in, day out, and beyond. As I always say, you do not need supplements to become all jacked and tan or to progress in your health journey, but they could definitely be a useful tool in that respect. So as you can see on tigerfitness.com, we got MTS Nutrition, Blackstone Labs, Ambrosia, HPN, Nutrix Research, America Labs, Alani New, Pump Chasers. There's Redcon One, Accent Sledge, plenty of different companies that pretty much have absolutely any supplement you could possibly think of: pre-workouts, fat burners, BCAAs, electrolyte mixes, you name it, it's on there. So go to Tiger Fitness through the link below. Use code Kyle at checkout to let them know that I sent you. Get your protein powder, you name it, anything that's going to help you stick to your diet and hopefully achieve your health goals. All right, thanks. Back to the show. Yeah, so like I said, just the first hour was just a frustrating display of like, oh, he said, she said bullshit, rather than actually kind of engaging with the material at hand. Like, okay, well, what do you think about Israel committing this war or, committing this war in Gaza and dropping bombs on hospitals? Do you believe the Gaza Health Ministry death count? Do you believe that Israel's just in its response? And all these are fair questions to debate and fair questions to talk about. And then also the war in Ukraine, where allegedly Douglas Murray was on the ground in Ukraine and said that, oh, I could see Ukraine winning. And Red Hawk and I talked in private about this. And it was like all these military dudes who like go to all these places and supposedly have all this military intelligence. They always get the shit so fucking wrong. Mike Sartain's another guy who I don't dislike the guy. I invited him to come on the show, and he says he does all these podcasts, but then declines to do mine, which whatever, for whatever, I'm sure he has his reasons. That's okay. But he's another guy that at one point said Ukraine is going to win the war Ukraine's going to win the war. Well, I don't think it takes a military genius to kind of see just like the territory that Russia has, the way that they've fought wars in the past, and their ability to wage war and their economy and everything seemed pretty obvious that Russia was going to win this one. Now, granted, I think there was an error on both sides where the people who thought that Russia was just going to go in and dominate, they were wrong, because I think they underestimated just how much the Western world was going to come to the backing of Ukraine. But I also think that the Ukrainian people probably didn't realize that, like, yeah, Russia's going to go in and it's going to be bad. Where I think Dave DeCamp and I, the Battle of Bakhmut, that was it. Tommy and I talked about this, I think, one of the last times I want to show, where they said allegedly the average lifespan of a soldier there was 4 hours. They called it the meat grinder. Just absolutely brutal. So Douglas Murray was wrong there. I think he's wrong at Israel as well. So, and it was just a lot of straw man arguments of, oh, well, the experts, we need to have more experts on. Okay, well, I mean, that's fine, but the problem is who decides what an expert is. And like, I'm kind of guilty of this as well, where like, I understand I have a lane. Like, the only thing I will certifiably say I'm an expert on is automotive technology. I have all my ASEs. I worked on cars for 13 years, and I've been in and out of just about every single GM vehicle within the last 10 years you could possibly think of. That I think qualifies me as an expert in my field through tests, through education, through work experience, right? I'm not a geopolitics expert. I'm not even a health expert. I'm a personal trainer, but like I definitely know more than the average bear when it comes to muscle protein synthesis, the way you grow muscle, nutrition and stuff like that. But I still don't know if you could necessarily qualify me as an expert because I never went to school for it. I never did it for a living. I just kind of know these things, right? We all kind of have these things that we know and talk about, but aren't necessarily an expert in. Now, when it comes to this expert class, like they were kind of talking about, Dave brought up a good point of the experts have so consistently got it wrong since 2020, where I'm pretty sure I think they brought up like the whole vaccine deal and also like Joe Rogan getting denounced by the president and Anthony Fauci for saying that instead of getting vaccinated, that you should probably just be healthy. Sounds pretty reasonable to me. I never took the vaccine or anything like that. I had COVID twice. It just is what it is. Granted, the second time through, it wasn't that great, but the first time it wasn't bad at all. But once again, everybody's experience is going to be a little bit different with this, and I think all doctors, people, anybody with a brain in their head would probably agree that, like, hey, if you're young and healthy, you're probably going to be fine when it comes to getting sick in general, not just with COVID, but overall. And for some reason that required a denouncement from on high, which just to me seems ridiculous, which is where we kind of get into like, I think this disqualifies certain people where if you're saying that just being young and healthy isn't enough, according to all literature that I've read, and probably every single person that's going to listen to this podcast, and most people that are kind of in this, libertarian right wing sphere, whatever you want to call it, um, we've all probably seen that. Yeah, if you're young and healthy, you're probably fine when it comes to getting sick. Does that mean it's not going to suck? No, but that being said, you're going to be fine. And most data would support that if you don't get that certain medical treatment, you're still going to be fine either way. So that's where the experts start to discredit themselves. And then when you look in the realm of foreign policy, like Dave said in this debate, there were so many people that just lied. So many foreign policy experts, quote unquote, that lied through their teeth. Weapons of mass destruction. Assad's going to go genocidal. The Uyghur genocide. The ghost of Kiev. Ukraine could win the war. If we just fund all these countries, and the government in Iraq's going to be fine whenever basically whenever the US leaves, when I think it was pretty clear that that was doomed to fail from the beginning, is what it is. And that's kind of where, once again, these quote unquote experts kind of lose their credibility in this respect. So um I think about the health world as well, and this kind of gets a little bit off topic, but I still think kind of relevant to the overall conversation. When you look at the health establishment writ large, especially over 2020, and you look at the obesity rates in this country specifically, you can't really blame people for saying that everybody got it all wrong. Because I've said the stat ad nauseum, and I'm sure it's probably changed at this point, but like only 12% of the population in the United States is considered metabolically fit. So obviously, somewhere along the way, some people failed, and we got to where we're at today. So whenever I see people saying, "Oh, screw seed oil, screw sugar, screw this, screw that," I understand because it's a reflective reaction to the quote unquote expert class and what they told people to consume or not consume. And that's where podcasts and different viewpoints become so relevant and important. I think that some of this alt media sphere is getting wrong. Like I literally just listened to a video from Lane Norton a little bit earlier where they had another meta-analysis that basically vindicated what I've talked on this show ad nauseum about, and that seed oils are generally fine for you. But I don't necessarily fault people for thinking that they're not. I do my best to correct people, and people berate me for it. But it's not necessarily wrong to think that, because you look how ubiquitous they are in the entire food supply. And it's like, oh, well, they're in everything and people eat these things all the time. And then, oh, well, A, B, Z, people are sick, we're fat, everybody's dying and getting cancer. when really, as I've explained ad nauseum on the show again, is just basically the human appetite is a very, very complex thing, and human physiology and psychology is a very complex thing, and all those things play into appetite and metabolism. We don't just eat because we're hungry. We eat because of social settings. We eat because we're bored. We eat because we just worked out and we know we need to get protein in. And just all these different things compound our, lizard brain, if you will, and make us want to consume food. It was a necessary drive for us to survive as long as we did. The problem is that hyperpalatable foods, high sugar, high fat, even certain textures in your mouth will take advantage of that instinct, and then you overeat and become obese and get sick. And that's how we get in the mess that we're in today, because the ubiquity of hyperpalatable foods, and also just how readily available, well, ubiquity and the readily availableness of these foods is the same thing, but they're so readily available, and we don't know how to regulate, basically regulate our appetite without severe, without a lot of conscious effort. um that kind of takes advantage of that primal instinct, and then all of a sudden now we're fat, right? Like, I have to use cognitive restraint to stop myself from overeating. Some people, have more leptin or ghrelin or whatever, or just, their body fat set point's a little bit different, so it's a little bit easier for them. Each person's a little bit individual about how they deal with this kind of appetite. But that being said, there is behaviors that we have to take on and accept responsibility for if we want to see better health outcomes. And this, tying this back to kind of the whole expert deal, the idea to tell people that, like, oh, well, you shouldn't get too much protein, and like the overall protein recommendation is super, super, super low. And no wonder people are hungry. And Ted Naiman and I think talked about this when I had him on, Jesus, like almost 4 years ago now. Basically, the standard American diet is like right at the carbohydrate and fat amount with the overall protein amount to make you want to continue eating. And he's a fan of the protein leveraging hypothesis. I don't necessarily agree. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. But that being said, he basically posits that, like, this is the exact diet that we feed mice to get them obese, and this replicates in humans. It's not 100%, I don't think, but you could see where it makes sense. So, the quote unquote experts in the food pyramid tells you to have all these grains, low protein, don't have a lot of animal proteins, where I'm kind of like of the idea that, like, a Mediterranean type style diet is fine. If you want to have lots of lean animal proteins and lots of fruits and vegetables, kind of like I do, I think that's a great diet. What I don't think is an optimal diet is kind of where you restrict protein and you just have lots of high carb, high fat stuff and the very, very low protein, because I truly do believe that protein is the most important macronutrient, and that the more you get of it, the more satiated you're going to be, and the more muscle mass you could build. And also, the greater thermic effect of food, all these good benefits come from having a higher protein diet, which can help you be healthier overall. So now that I've kind of gone over the whole expert deal, right? Let's kind of review this one clip that everybody was sharing around, and we'll talk about it.
Have you been to the crossing points?
I really resent that form of argumentation.
When we
So this was Douglas Murray versus Douglas Murray, and it cracks me up. And this was another thing that I thought was just so dumb, is the have you been there? If you haven't been there, then you can't comment on it. Anyways,
been asked there at all,
Sure.
I really resent it.
you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
This is not an attractive invitation.
I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you spend a career talking about something.
and Dave here responds, and I know this is kind of like supposed to be a funny clip, but I do kind of want to pick apart some of this. And it's so funny that you can't know anything allegedly without lived experience. Do I need to do heroin to tell you that it's bad? I don't think so. Like, I just don't believe that.
I have the right to talk about whatever the hell I want, and no one's going to stop me or try to intimidate me. And I think that if I said to somebody else the other way around, it would be equally reprehensible.
I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country, even in passing, unless I've at least been there.
If I said, shut up, you have no right to criticize anything that Douglas Murray says because
Hang on, you're talking about crossing points. And not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region.
okay, it's not an exact comparison.
One more time. It's just so dumb. Yeah, Murray should go be British somewhere else. Yeah, I completely agree. I think you can triangulate truth, right? Where basically you get information from both sides and you should weigh the amount of like evidence and eyewitness testimony, all this kind of stuff. Like the reason why I believe the Hamas death count, as people will say, or the Gaza Health Ministry, is because it's been constantly backed up by third party organizations, and they all usually say that it's an undercount. Douglas Murray would disagree, but I disagree with him that, once again, if they consistently say that's an undercount, then, I just think you're full of crap.
But seriously, is that a reasonable form of argument? No. In that case, nobody can talk about anything. We might as well pack up, go home, and isolate ourselves.
If you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind or not claim.
And this is the other thing, is that, nobody was really claiming to be an expert in a lot of these situations. And I get it. There kind of is like this plausible deniability with some people. Like Alex Jones does this, where he throws all sorts of shit at the wall and then says, oh, but I'm a comedian, or but I'm an entertainer. I think you should look at Alex Jones as an entertainer, because all he does now is pretty much post slop and put breaking behind everything and just, wallows at Trump's feet at this point, which is just so sickening. After he said I wish I would have never met Donald Trump. Just like that kind of shit, just this back and forth all the time. It's dumb. Alex Jones is an entertainer. He's a bullshitter. Remember, he said that Hillary Clinton was going to be the DNC nominee. No planes on 9/11. I don't recommend getting a lot of your news from Alex Jones for specifically that reason.
I mean, you're an expert, but still talking about it. If you've never seen any of this going on.
I mean, there are some people who've written about there are people who've written about the Holocaust who didn't experience the Holocaust and have written about it better than people who did.
But that is a different matter.
Which is hilarious, once again, because he was arguing that you had to be there. So wouldn't you think that the people who had allegedly been through the Holocaust would be able to write about it better than anybody else? What's up, B? Excited to jam this weekend. As I told everybody a little bit earlier, if you're in the southwestern Pennsylvania area, please come out and see us at the 11th Frame in Butler. It's going to be a cool show.
From spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit.
So I've never been to China, but I've had conversations with people who live in China, people who have been there, and I also talk to people who study it much more than I do. Does that mean I should stop talking about it? According to Douglas Murray, he would say yes. I think no. China really interests me because this is kind of like the main target of the US government right now. And also, it's another country that just completely changed their standard of living so much over the last 30 years. It's just very interesting to look at like the countries that we're supposed to hate so much and learn everything I can about them. And I'm still trying to do this day to day, is learn more about China, learn more about Russia, learn more about Iran, even learn more about Qatar. And, I do kind of want to throw this in here because obviously I talk about Israel quite a bit because this is kind of like the government that has the biggest influence over our own government. And also they receive the most amount of foreign aid from the US. But there is kind of giving the devil its due here, where a lot of these Douglas Murray types bring up, oh, but Qatar is funding all the universities. Okay, so I looked into this. In 2024, Qatar spent about $7 million in the US. AIPAC spent hundreds of millions. I mean, just completely dwarfs Qatar spending. Now, I guess where I can give the devil more so its due is that, yeah, $7 million isn't no money, but when we're talking about, comparing it to AIPAC, that's a drop in the bucket. But allegedly, they spend a lot of money on like universities and stuff like that. I don't know how deep that goes, but I think all reasonable people would agree that like Ukrainians, Taiwanese, Israelis, all these people from foreign governments, Chinese, you name it, should not be lobbying on behalf of their country for the US government. If you are here from a foreign country and you're lobbying on behalf, that if you're lobbying for your country to be overthrown, which is what a lot of immigrants do, if you come from Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, China, India, Iran, Syria, Iraq, you name it. If you come from these countries and then you come to America and you demand that the American taxpayers and American soldiers go over there and make your country better, you need to be deported and you need to go back and you need to fix your own country before you advocate that we do it. The American taxpayers and the American servicemen and women are not here to make your country better. We should not be the world police, and we don't have the capability to do that. We tried that in Iraq and we failed. We tried that all over the Middle East and failed. We cannot do that. We should not do that. It's not worth the blood. It's not worth the American lives when our own here are suffering. I say this all the time, but I don't care about the immigration conversation in respects to whether we should have more or less. I think we should have none until Americans here are taken care of. I don't want to hear anything about military adventurism until we're taken care of here. I don't think that's an insane position. My buddy Rob was saying that he's going to go out and support me if I run for president, which is just that'll never happen. But so anyways, back to the clip.
Whilst developing all of these views about it,
This idea that the lived experience has to triumph over everything else is not always correct.
should at least know what it is, what the territory is, what the situation is in the region.
So there's an irony to this, but let's skate over the irony.
I thought they did a pretty good job of kind of cutting that all together. But yeah, as you could see, just like the appeal to authority, which like I know people kind of swat that away as like a non-argument, but there is a certain, I think there is a reasonable way to appeal to an authority if somebody has the facts and evidence on their side. You can't just appeal to an authority and say, oh, well, they're the authority on this, so therefore go argue with them because they know all this. Well, can you check their facts? Can you check their information and see if what they're saying is correct? There are plenty of things in the automotive world that I'm sure I'm still wrong about. And, you know, there have been times where I thought a certain part would fix a car and it didn't. It happens. Nobody's above reproach or error. It just is the human condition. That being said, you know, there are certain people who are probably more correct than others in this respect. So I thought this was a little funny. I probably won't play the full 7 or 8 minutes. You know, maybe I'll bump up the speed a little bit so that way it goes by a little bit quicker. So let me pull this clip back up and put myself here.
People who have appointed themselves experts who are not experts.
You mean like Ian? I don't think he appoints himself an expert in anything.
Who's that other dude who thinks he's an expert on church?
And see, this is right where he was talking about Daryl Cooper. Like, you would think that if you are going to talk about somebody and complain about what they said, you would know that person and at least be able to cite some of their work. But he doesn't.
Sure.
Oh, Daryl Cooper does not think he's an expert.
Well, I'm not capable of debating this historian, but I'm going to just tell you what I think.
And that's him talking about Daryl Cooper and what he says.
Yeah, but that's not
I think that's a
exactly,
little
that's
bit
not
out of
exactly what
context.
Daryl was saying.
When he was offered to debate the current greatest living biographer of Churchill, he said, I can't, because he knows much more than me. And
this is actually kind of funny because they did these little facts. So for those just listening, did Daryl Cooper say he couldn't debate Andrew Roberts or won a later debate? I want to quote, be concise. Daryl Cooper didn't say he couldn't debate Andrew Roberts. He expressed a preference for a later debate starting in September 26, 2024, Substack post. Given the noise this has all created, he would prefer to let his work speak for itself when it's actually finished, so then a proper debate on the subject could be had.
I admire his work and I've learned from it, but I can't possibly debate him. That's Andrew Roberts. If you say, I've decided that Churchill is the bad guy in the
Somebody
World War
said. Somebody said.
I believe was the
II, he
way
also
put it.
said on here that he wasn't anti-Semitic until the Holocaust. There were no
Okay, so once again, I'm just kind of reading some of this stuff here. They're talking about when Hitler was kind of coming to power in World War II, that he basically hit his anti-Semitism. So the quote, this person asked Grok, did Daryl Cooper say that Hitler wasn't anti-Semitic in the beginning until the Holocaust, or that Hitler downplayed it in the beginning? Be concise. Daryl Cooper claimed that Hitler downplayed his anti-Semitism in the early years to gain broader support, not that he wasn't anti-Semitic. He suggested Hitler's public rhetoric was less overtly anti-Semitic until later, despite the evidence of consistent anti-Semitic ideology from the start.
No speeches of Hitler's in the
No,
1930s.
again, this is, no.
Listen,
I'm
it's on-
sorry, because maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. People that I've had conversations with.
So when you hear like these slaps, it's a straw man counter, and then it says getting slapped down on the straw man.
Two guys
downplayed
are
the
examples of
Holocaust.
this.
Well, who were the two guys?
I just
Daryl
told you,
Cooper,
Cooper and the other
Ian
friend of
Carroll.
yours, Andrew
I've
Carroll.
never podcasted with Ian Carroll. I have.
So, and here he was saying that Ian Carroll was basically doing the same thing of World War II revisionism, which he never did, at least not to my knowledge. He kind of talks about health stuff and some other conspiracies, but doesn't really talk about World War II. He talks about Israel and some Jewish influence, but doesn't really dive too much into World War II stuff, or at least not that I've ever listened to. And I don't really listen to Ian Carroll either, so I can't really stick up for it one way or the other.
Have podcasted with Daryl Cooper once, and he absolutely did not downplay any of the Nazi atrocities at all.
You decide to go, hey, what else have we been lied to? Maybe Churchill wasn't a great guy. Maybe Hitler wasn't such a bad guy. Maybe the Holocaust. et cetera, et cetera.
Nobody
And that
is
is
saying that.
exactly
No
what
one
they're
is saying maybe Hitler.
See, and this is the other thing where, like, why are you getting angry at people asking questions? And I'm sure Douglas Murray would kind of be the type that says the best antidote to bad speech is more speech. And generally, I agree with that. Where, if you hear things that you don't agree with, then why don't you set the record straight? He has a voice. He has access to big content creators. You could put your message out there. You could make a Twitter video or something like that and then debunk what they're saying, do a side-by-side video, kind of like I'm doing right now. Not hard.
It wasn't such a
You
bad.
are
Wait,
saying that.
No
You're
one's saying
saying
that.
that
The basis
he
of
and
this.
these other guys are all doing the anti-Churchill stuff now.
But he's not doing an anti-Churchill
Okay,
stuff.
he and the other
Churchill
people in
was,
the orbit I
Churchill was
described.
the author of this whole Operation Unthinkable, right? Where they wanted to use the Nazis to invade Russia. Wasn't that Churchill? Is that not true?
If I'd have been running the British Empire in 1939, I'd have known exactly how to do it. And I'd have known how to hold the whole thing together. And I'd have kept Stalin back, and he'd have been great at Yalta. And I'm like, this is.
But I don't think anybody's saying that. Yeah,
Yeah, and one more time, I don't think anybody is saying that does World War II revisionist history, which that sounds like a slur, but I don't want it to be a slur. I don't think any of those people are saying that had they been in charge, that everything would have been fine. And I actually understand where a lot of his sentiments are coming from. And I think it's kind of like out of the contrarian nature of when you hear something you don't agree with, you kind of run back to your instincts and what you know. And I think that's what he's doing here. I understand, but once again, I don't think anyone is saying that that if they been in charge, that everything would be fine. I think they're saying that there was a better way to go about it. And looking back on it, it's a great tragedy, but there were steps that could have been taken to avoid it. Homeschool time. If you are always waging war, then you are not the good guys, a veteran. Yeah, exactly. Why can't they just agree with my they're stopping here, but yeah, why can't they just agree with my counter arguments to points they didn't make, which is exactly what they're doing. Like, why are you debating what somebody didn't say with people who didn't say that? Like, it's such a ridiculous standard, or such like a ridiculous tactic.
You know all about this as well. You say, I'm not a historian, but I'm going to spend my time talking about history. I'm not a journalist, but I'm going to spend my time talking about this thing. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to spend my time talking about this thing. It's a weird move, yeah?
No.
It's a weird move.
Yeah, so why can you not talk about things? Like, I talk about horror movies, but I'm not an expert in horror movies. I enjoy them. I talk about dogs. I'm not an expert in dogs. Buddy right here wants to say hi. He sure wishes I was.
Move, yeah?
No. Everyone I hear on the inside says we're about to attack Iraq.
On a scale from Douglas Murray to Dave Smith, how insufferable or charitable are you with your opponents? And this is where they start talking about Iran and, if we, as in the U.S., are going to war with Iran or not.
I think you just said something about that the other day. Am I wrong about that? I thought I saw in one of your interviews that you did.
Possibly.
No. Okay.
That doesn't mean we are on the verge of a war. I mean, you keep referring to we being in wars. There's a very big difference between a country having a military that's engaged and a country being at war. This country
it kind of sounds like a distinction without a difference. And saying a country's at war versus a military that's engaged, it's so semantic in my mind because the US is at war with all these countries in the Middle East, with the exception of Iraq, or no, I'm sorry, with the exception of Afghanistan, where we're performing drone strikes and there's troops in these countries fighting other military personnel. I think it's reasonable to say that the country is at war with that country at that point. And I guess they have the plausible deniability of saying that it's done under the AUMF, the Authorized Use of Military Force, back in 2001. Pretty semantic.
has not been at war for 25 years. You have not been fighting for the American homeland for 25 years.
Yes, we haven't. That's true. We
Right,
haven't had a war
right.
on our shores. We've been picking on third world countries halfway around the world.
Well, you haven't been randomly picking on them. I mean, Afghanistan.
And then he says randomly picking on them, and which is just a total just non sequitur. He didn't say anything about random countries. He said that we've been picking on countries, in the Middle East, not random. Now, once again, it just so happens that the neoconservatives had basically lined this up and had the United States go and fight all these countries at the behest of it, not necessarily at the behest of Israel, but largely to benefit Israel and the oil monopolies. But anyways,
You went.
I didn't say it was random.
Yeah.
Because we've been picking on third world countries halfway around the world.
Well, you haven't been randomly picking on them. I mean, about this move from I'm an expert on this and I have views to I'm a comedian.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. I mean, if somebody
Wait a minute,
says
you have to claim to be an expert on something
No,
to have an opinion on
no,
something?
and it does not mean that every single one of the sewer gates should be lifted. Okay.
What?
Yeah, I get that point.
I think they may have cut it out. And if he says it, I'll apologize. But he asks, "So, well, what are you pushing? What's your narrative?" And that's a fair question to ask. But if you listen to the person you're debating, then you can hear what they're pushing and hear what they're supporting, right?
Right.
Who's saying it should be?
Is the person you're arguing with in the same room with us? And Joe Rogan's face is pretty funny.
It's a bit weird to be simultaneously saying I'm not an expert on a conflict and talking about it everywhere.
I don't think so. Not really. I mean, I don't know. I don't think like
I don't
you,
know.
I don't see how you
Do
can
you
have an
talk
opinion
about
on
these
things.
things?
Yeah, and to this point, like you could be informed on things and talk about them and not consider yourself an expert. Like, what is the standard for when you can consider yourself an expert? It's pretty arbitrary, it seems like to me. Do you, after you read 43 books, are you an expert? But not until you read, you have to read 43. If you read 42 books, you're not an expert. But once you hit 43, you're an expert. What's the standard here? Do you have to study for so many years? I think about this point when it comes to musicians as well. Like, you think about Bob Dylan, right? Who has been playing music for longer than probably even my dad's been alive, right? My dad's 56 this year. He's not a good singer. I don't think anybody would tell you Bob Dylan's a good singer, but he's a good lyricist. So does that make him an expert in music because he's been playing for so long? I don't know. Am I an expert in music because I've been playing guitar for almost 20 years? I don't think I don't know. I don't know everything about a guitar. I can kind of set them up. I can restring them. I can play them hopefully somewhat well. But I don't think that makes me an expert in guitars. So
Which things?
All these things that we're talking about.
Some of them, yeah.
Are you an expert
I am on some, yes.
on some?
But
but
talk
not-
about something you're
But
not an
some
expert
I'm
on.
You'll
Right,
notice
so
that I
what should you
didn't.
do?
You'll
What
note-
should you do if those subjects get
Is it-
breached?
Well, I think that you educate yourself as much as you
Should
can.
you say I'm not an expert and then give your opinion if you're
depends.
in the middle of a
I think
conversation?
it's, as I say, I think that it's a weird move to say I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to talk about it nonstop. And yes, everyone is free to air their
I understand where he's going with this because it kind of is. I've heard people knock other people for this, but like, you'll see like acupuncturists and chiropractors that all of a sudden go into being nutritionists or nutrition influencers on YouTube, and they're usually full of shit about a lot of stuff. Or a naturopath, heaven forbid. So I get it, but you can always look up the information that they're sharing and then debunk them if you think they're incorrect. That would be the right move.
views, but it does not mean that everyone who sounds off on an issue, whether it's World War II, the war in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, has an equally valid point of view. No.
I certainly wouldn't argue. I mean, that to me is just batting down a straw man. I mean, I certainly wouldn't argue that everyone has an equally valid point of view.
Is that there's a heck of a lot going on.
So they're up to 13 straw man counters, and nobody They said after that, nobody said that in the history of saying, which just like I love how this video is edited. It's so funny.
That America is frankly not really involved in.
Well, that's
And-
certainly a straw man of my position. I'm
No,
not
no,
saying
no,
that
no. I know
America
what I'm
is.
saying. No. But what I'm saying, he lies to the world, and he decided he wanted to gobble up Ukraine because he wants to
Okay, so what did Putin say? Because he's talking about Putin reconstituting the Soviet Union, which is just ridiculous. If he wanted to do that, he would be attacking more countries rather than just Ukraine. I think he's just kind of looking at the territories in Ukraine that are ethnically Russian and wants to protect those people. So another quote from Grok. What did Putin say about those who want to reinstate the Soviet Union? Give me his quote. Vladimir Putin said, anyone who doesn't regret the passing of the Soviet Union has no heart. Anyone who wants it restored has no brains. That right there. Now, am I saying that you could trust everything, Vladimir Putin says wholesale? No, but you can kind of decide somebody's motivations, or at least I shouldn't say decide, but you can kind of understand somebody's motivations by what they say and what they do.
constitute the Soviet Union.
Sort
He
that, but-
invaded because of the thing he's dreamt of since he falling down to the Soviet Union.
Do you know how he dreams?
His dream is, as he's said many times, is the reconstitution of the Soviet Union's territory.
Us luring them into Afghanistan played a huge role in weakening the Soviet Union. It came with the minor little price.
So they're talking about Afghanistan, and Dave said, luring Russia into Afghanistan played a huge role.
Tag of
That
9/11.
was the-
But
that was-
okay, that's
the Soviet Union did not fall just because.
And he said the USSR did not fall because of Afghanistan, which Dave never said.
of Afghanistan.
No, I didn't say. I said played a role. I didn't say it was
No,
just
no,
because of Afghanistan.
same thing.
No, 2014. This was a major provocation toward the.
So here they're talking about the funding of all the protests and everything, and all the elected officials, John McCain and Victoria Nuland, going over to Ukraine to hand out sandwiches and flyers and pamphlets and all that stuff during the Maidan coup. And if you're listening, it says right in front of Dave, funding anti-Russia protesters in Ukraine was a provocation.
Russians that we backed this street protest against the democratically elected government there, and
that's again, it's tricky because the
Okay, so Douglas says that it's a genuine protest. And someone pulled up on Grok. Did Nuland discuss choosing specific people to be elected in the middle of Maidan protests in Ukraine? Be concise. Victoria Nuland discussed preferences for Ukrainian leadership during the Maidan protests, not directly choosing elected officials. In a leaked February 2014 call with Jeffrey Pyatt, she said, I think Yats is the guy, referring to Yatsenuk for prime minister and suggesting Vitaly Klitschko to stay out of government.
Maidan protests were genuine students in the center of the city who were uprising against a corrupt government.
I'm
But you're,
talking about-
you're saying that like we'd lose our mind if anyone tried to interfere here. There are lots of people.
I
who
wasn't
tried to
saying if
interfere,
anyone-
and the most obvious one is Qatar.
didn't you write a big piece when the war in Ukraine first?
Okay, so did Douglas Murray in his article in 2022 say something to the effect of, if we continue to fund Ukraine more, they can win? In 2022, Douglas Murray expressed strong support for Ukraine and its conflict with Russia, particularly emphasizing the importance of Western aid. While there isn't an exact quote from a 2022 article where he says verbatim, if we continue to fund Ukraine more, they can win, he made statements that align with this sentiment. For instance, in a column for the New York Post on November 18th, 2022, titled On a Visit to the Newly Liberated Kherson, I see why the Ukrainians will win with our support. Murray wrote.
Came out titled something like "I've been to Ukraine and they can win, they can repel the Russians." So you could go there and still get it wrong, right?
No, I was with the Ukrainian armed forces in 2022 when they were retaking territory from the Russians.
Right. The last time they had any advances, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
I said I can see how they could win, which would be advances like that. Yeah.
You said if we just fund them, or if we just
No,
arm
no, I
them,
didn't
that they
say
can
that.
then
I said,
they can
I said
repel.
that the Ukrainian army was
Okay.
making great successes, which it was when I was with them in the fall of
Okay,
22.
listen.
Imagine you've read all the people who say that Gaza was a concentration camp, and you probably think that too. Am I right?
I mean, again, literally a concentration camp. It shares a lot of similarities, I would think.
Wow. Because you said you do think it's a concentration camp.
So it's a straw man counter I give up because there were so many straw men. But, I think it's fair to say that, yeah, there is some similarities between a concentration camp and what's going on in Gaza when Israel controls how much food gets in there, the electricity, the water, and specifically, they've had plans of how many calories can get in there. You're like, what food goes in, what kind of aid, all this stuff. I think that, that's not necessarily a free people. That's a captive people, which Dave kind of lays out here.
Because there is no intention on the Israeli side caused the
Bashes comedian calling themselves experts and says no intention on Israeli side to kill non-combatants.
death of non-combatants.
He said later in an interview with Piers Morgan that he had seen the plans at first in 1991, that they came from Paul Wolfowitz, that basically then they got, what was funny,
Summary of the debate. Dave makes a point. Douglas argues with another point.
what the four-star general said.
It's okay, continue.
No, I'm just curious, what's laughable about this?
Paul Wolfowitz is a great figure for almost any deep conspiracy.
So here they start talking about Paul Wolfowitz, and they kind of like things kind of cool down, but you know, they basically Douglas Murray basically dusts him off as not really that influential of a figure.
Because he was a deputy secretary of defense, the highest in his life. He is forever being ascribed almost supernatural power.
And it's funny because I don't think I've ever heard anybody specifically ascribe Paul Wolfowitz as like the chief neocon and leader of all the worst things. I usually hear Douglas Feith, Paul Wolfowitz, Bill Kristol. I'm sure there's some other names that I'm forgetting, but like Frank Gaffney would be another one. There's a whole bunch of neoconservatives that were around in this era that had influence, and I don't think anybody's ever said that Paul Wolfowitz was like the chief neocon.
I mean,
The
it's-
highest position he ever got to was Donald Rumsfeld's deputy. And it's a very strange thing always when
Rumsfeld too.
Wolfowitz's name comes up because he was a relatively low-level person to whom almost everything can be ascribed.
Well, I didn't describe this.
Anyway,
I didn't describe every video. I'm literally telling you what.
Anyway,
No, I'm telling you what the four-star general said about him. And I would say deputy secretary of defense is like a nothing position. It's a pretty consequential position.
Nothing to do with Rumsfeld or Cheney, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. But who said it was?
No, fair enough.
I just feel you're betting against straw man. I never said that he is the creator of all conspiracies. Or anything.
So that is that. I'll remove this here. Yeah, so obviously go watch the debate for yourself. Dave, if you're listening one more time, open invitation to come back on. I've been trying to get you back on for a little bit. And I'm sure he's busy. Maybe my show's too small at this point for him to come back on, but that's okay. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Next week, I do have a pretty cool guest lined up, and we're going to talk about a very, very interesting topic. Real looking forward to that. And then the week after that, I'm going to have our dear friend Mike Jackman back on, and the return of Sunday Coffee this week, finally. I don't quite have an idea for what I'm going to talk about, but I just kind of like getting on here and just kind of chatting with all you lovely people. So Sunday Coffee, 9:45 a.m. on Sunday after I get a good workout in. And then I don't know who will host Post Zero. I may or may not be on Rule Zero on Saturday. We'll kind of have to see. I do have a busy day planned out, but life is going good for me. So yeah, I guess one more time, all links below for everything I got going on. Make sure you check out A Common Crown. We are in the studio. Please become a channel member if you feel so inclined and can financially, be able to do so. Just $2.99 a month will get you access to all of Common Crown's footage that I record. This weekend is going to have some cool songs and some covers and stuff like that. Like I said, I'll probably put one of them up on the channel just for everybody else, and can encourage the rest of you guys to become channel members to see the full performance. And I think with that, I'm going to close her on out. So one more time, thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, take care.